Saturday the 9th of July. I'm on my way to Wandai to record for Jason Ford, and with Jason Ford a very special YouTube as he runs another taste the trail function. And as it happens, Peter Acey here. I'm recording this from Kingaroy, and behind me is the stone of remembrance that has featured very prominently in previous YouTube on the importance of the 100th anniversaries. And again, I'm recording for World Expo 88 Legacy YouTube channel and the Anzac Day Precinct YouTube channel, Mount Cootha, and lastly the Brisbane Tennis Trail YouTube channel. And I have decided to record again because I received a little bit of criticism from people saying, well, there were far more other great sporting achievements besides tennis, and yes, that's very true, not the least of which was Walligrout's efforts in bringing the test in the Gabba, I think in 1963, to a tie, being the person who ran the run that brought it to a tie, and then getting out, which then left one person to score a run at least, and that person was also out, meaning the very first tie test match ever was recorded in Brisbane. Now, I'm also using this particular YouTube to talk about Doctor Who, because it's very important in our narrative, and also just to give people some assurance, the introductions are different in this particular case. So let's move on as we talk about this particular important topic. So as we record and taking advantage of Jason's quite amazing epic trail ride that he's organised, let's look into the cultural aspect of what's unique about Brisbane. And one should be mentioning punk bands like the Saints, which were world leaders in their genre. One should also, however, think of Doctor Who. And this YouTube is primarily about fleshing out the detail of the unique aspect of Doctor Who in the narrative of Brisbane. And funny enough, the best place to start the narrative is with a motion in the Federal Parliament by George Christensen, a federal politician I would not normally have a lot of time for, to be honest, but I found what he said about Doctor Who and Australia and how it's going to lead into our Brisbane narrative quite compelling.
That strange blue police public call box was actually a machine that travelled in time and space, anywhere in fact throughout time and space. And the very next story took them to an alien planet, Skaro, where they met the Daleks for the first time, and they became almost synonymous with the show, and that happened, that's to this very day, and in fact probably made the show what it is because it scared the hell out of a lot of kids throughout Britain and elsewhere. For 5 decades, the show Doctor Who has enthralled audiences right across the world, particularly in the Anglosphere, and Australia being one of those countries where the enthralment has occurred. Now, there's been a lot of links between Doctor Who and Australia that people aren't aware of. In fact, I've left out a crucial link in the motion that I want to state from the outset. And that link is that one of the architects behind the show's concept was a fellow by the name of C.E. Bunny, as they called him, Webber. And C.E. Bunny Webber helped with Verity Lambert and Sidney Newman, the other two people behind the show, to come up with the entire concept for Doctor Who. He was an Australian, and he actually came up with the plot of the first story, which was then written in full by another Australian, Anthony Coburn. So the very concept of Doctor Who was helped form by an Australian, the very first episode of Doctor Who written by an Australian. More than that, the famous theme tune the dum-de-dum, dum-de-dum. That actually...
I want to see.
I won't go further than before Morton, but
Sing it.
I could if you want, but we've only got 10 minutes. Now, look, that was actually written and composed by an Australian, Ron Grainer. So that's absolutely fantastic, the fact that there's so many links between our country. But it hasn't actually stopped there. As is outlined in my motion, there are plenty of actors actually that have links there. Janet Fielding, she is an Australian herself. She played an Australian character in the TV show, playing opposite both Tom Baker, but mainly Peter Davison, who portrayed the Doctor at the time during the 1980s. There is Katie Manning, who actually went on to become an Australian citizen. She was married to Barry Crocker.
A suitable follow-on to George Christensen is Janet Fielding talking here about her motivation and her thoughts about the era as she talks to Spencer Howson. And it is very suitable given the fact that Jason started his bike ride this morning off at Kingaroy, home of Sir Joe Bjelke-Petersen.
And now the whole feeling about the Australian accent is it's become associated with a very cheerful culture and a can-do culture. And the perception of Australia as a country has changed enormously. But at the time, it was perceived as being out on a limb, blah, blah, blah. And Brisbane, within Australia, was perceived as being the end of the earth. We were, the banana benders. We were, Joe Bjelke-Petersen was the premier. He was ultra right-wing. There was a lot of corruption in Queensland. It was, it was the banana republic of Australia. And that was true. And the other thing to say is that it wasn't a very exciting place in which to live if you were young. There weren't a lot of music venues. There wasn't a lot happening. It was, and it was known for having absolutely no nightlife whatsoever.
And as we watch the legendary Ford team here putting together the meals, we can now have a listen to Tegan, or the actor playing Tegan, roast Brisbane quite unbelievably.
It's a zero room anyway. The doctor said something about null interfaces.
I suppose it's some sort of neutral environment, an isolated space cut off from the rest of the universe.
He should have told me that's what he wanted. I could have shown him Brisbane.
Well, of course, there's that line when Nissa says the doctor's in the zero room, a neutral environment, an isolated place cut off from the rest of the universe, and you reply, he should have told me that's what he wanted. I could have shown him Brisbane.
Yeah.
Which sums that up perfectly. Was that in the script, or did you put that in the script?
No, that was in the script. And I tried to tone that line down, and I was told no way.
But that's perhaps my favourite line in all of Doctor Who. As someone who lives here in Brisbane still, it's so wonderfully self-deprecating. But how did you feel saying that at the time?
I felt nervous saying that line at the time because I thought, oh my God, I'm really going to get it in the neck for this one. But it was true about Brisbane, and that's exactly what people said. And the reason, and that came from Gary Downey, from the producer's partner, who was a Sydney-sider. And so, like I was part of that sort of left-wing movement at university. Everybody ended up leaving Brisbane because...
Next, as we have a background look at the incredibly hard-working Ford team, let's just have a look at an excerpt in the modern era of Doctor Who and how it's roasted Brisbane.
Okay, so, not London 1893, Yorkshire 1893. Near enough.
You're making a habit of this, getting us lost.
Sorry, it's much better than it used to be. Ooh, I once spent a hell of a long time trying to get a gobby Australian to Heathrow Airport.
What for?
Search me. Anyway. Braveheart Clara.
And it's a nice tale at that.
So in conclusion, I'm just going to play another clip from the federal parliamentary motion, but I would ask the question, how can we expect the production house of Doctor Who to come to Australia, and hopefully Brisbane, if we don't celebrate our legacies to enable them to have story matter? Thank you for listening.
But seriously though, all of this culminates in what I think is a good request to the BBC to consider bringing Doctor Who to Australia. Now, in the year 2015, we will mark our 50th anniversary of the show first appearing on Australian screens, 15th of January 2015. That is an opportune point in history that the BBC could actually bring Doctor Who down under, just as they have taken it over to the US, just as they've taken it to many places throughout Europe. They could take Doctor Who to Australia, Christmas special Voyage of the Damned. So there is this myriad of connections between this show and our nation. In fact, actually, one thing I neglected to mention about Anthony Coburn, not only could he be credited for writing the first story, but in fact, it is believed that Coburn's idea was for the TARDIS to resemble a police box simply because he saw one in the street outside his office when he was actually writing the story and thought, what a nifty British institution to actually put in this show. So many connections between Australia and this show.